Ever wondered if making everyone vote, like, actually leads to more extreme government?
It's a question that keeps coming up, right?
Yeah, and you're definitely not alone in wanting to really get into the weeds on this whole compulsory voting thing.
Definitely not.
So that's what we're doing today, diving deep, using some sources you've shared, research papers, political analysis, even a little philosophy thrown in there.
Yeah, you weren't kidding about the mix of perspectives.
It'll be interesting to see where this takes us.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for, to help you cut through all that and find what really speaks to you, especially regarding, well, I know you were curious about connect to listeners' reason for choosing the topic. For example, electoral reform, political polarization, or specific regions using compulsory voting.
Right, like this isn't just some theoretical debate, it's real.
Oh, yeah.
27 countries actually have some form of compulsory voting.
Oh, wow.
I know. When I first learned that it was that many, I was pretty surprised.
It's easy to think it's this abstract idea, but
So-
it's real world stuff, real consequences if people don't show up to vote.
Exactly. So to really wrap our heads around this whole thing,
Yeah.
we got to start with the basics.
For sure. We've got to be on the same page, right?
Exactly. You know, we often think of voting as just a simple thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah, like a yay or nay.
But it's also been described as like a duty. Like you have to contribute to the democratic process.
It's a really different way of looking at it.
Totally. What resonates most with you about that, this whole voting is a duty idea?
That's a good question. I think for me it's about, well, it's almost like, are we taking our rights for granted if we don't see it as, at least in part, a responsibility? You know?
It's a big question and leads us to that other huge debate. Does forcing someone to vote, even if they just turn in a blank ballot, does that really uphold democratic ideals?
It's a big one. And honestly, it gets pretty complicated from here because you've got all these different angles to consider. Like one of the sources you shared, a 2024 paper by Ankudanov.e, it directly challenges the idea that compulsory voting equals automatically more extreme parties in power.
Which is wild because so much of what we hear seems to suggest that.
I know, it really makes you think twice. So how did Ankudanov approach this whole thing? They really dug into the data, right?
Big time. They weren't just looking at a couple of elections either.
No. They went all in. They looked at election data from 87 countries.
87.
87. And get this, they specifically focused on how what they called illiberal and populist parties were doing.
Okay, so we're talking about some loaded terms here. Can we break that down a bit? Illiberal, populist.
Totally. Basically, we're talking about parties that, well, they tend to challenge those norms of liberal democracy, often with like a more nationalist or authoritarian kind of vibe.
Okay, so strong stances, potentially shaking things up a bit,
Yeah.
but really important to be specific about who we're talking about here.
Mm.
And it sounds like they were trying to isolate the impact of the compulsory voting itself.
Exactly. It wasn't just, oh, these countries have compulsory voting and look, those parties are doing well. They took other stuff into account, like a country's wealth, education levels, all that.
Right. So it wasn't just like richer, more educated countries skewing the results.
Exactly. They factored that in. And after all that number crunching, data diving,
Yeah.
you know what they found?
What's the verdict?
They couldn't definitively say, yes, mandatory voting leads to these parties gaining more power. Now, there was one thing. They did find that in countries with compulsory voting, there was initially what looked like higher support for those parties.
Interesting.
But once they factored in those other things, the wealth, the education levels, all that link basically disappeared.
So it's way more nuanced than just saying make everyone vote and bam, extremists are running the show.
Right. It's not that simple.
It's not a direct line from A to B.
Not at all. And it makes you think about another point raised in one of the other papers you sent over the 2023 DESRI paper. It's not just who shows up to vote, but why they're there. Like, are they actually engaged or just there because they have to be?
Which makes you wonder about those potential downsides that DESRI brings up.
Yeah.
Like, if everyone's forced to vote, even if they're not really all that invested, what does that mean for the people who are passionate about the issues? Could it actually silence them?
It's a huge question, and it gets at the core of what makes voting truly democratic in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
Destry talks about freedom to choose, meaning people should be able to sit it out if they want to, and reason responsiveness.
Reason responsiveness. That's a mouthful.
I know, right? But it's basically saying, are people voting based on what they've actually thought about, or are they just ticking boxes? Which, let's be real, we've all been there.
Oh, totally. Especially when it comes to, like, local elections with a million uncontested races for, like, water commissioner. You're like, I don't even know what a water commissioner does.
Exactly. But zooming back out, we want our leaders making decisions based on reason, right? And actually responding to what people need. If everyone's just voting because they feel obligated to, are we really getting that?
That's the question, isn't it? And it all ties back to another thing Destry talks about, the donkey vote.
Yes. The classic just pick something vote.
Exactly. When you're just ticking boxes randomly because you feel like you have to vote for something. Not exactly the best way to get a thriving democracy, right?
No, exactly. It's more about checking a box than making a choice.
Totally. But it feels like we need to go even deeper here. We've talked about who votes, why they vote, but could the way compulsory voting is set up actually change those things?
Yeah.
I'm sensing a, but wait, there's more moment here.
You're totally right. We can't just lump all these systems together, right?
Right. It'd be like saying all democracies are the same.
Exactly. Or like all voting systems.
Yeah.
It's way more nuanced than that.
For sure. So what are we talking about here? When we talk about different flavors of compulsory voting, what are those differences?
Well, one of the biggest things is how they're enforced. Like, are there actual penalties for not voting?
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. And a 2022 paper by Kostelka and a bunch of other researchers, they really dug into this. Turns out it makes a huge difference.
Okay, so spill the tea. How big of a difference are we talking? What happens to turnout when those penalties are, like, actually a thing?
Okay, get this. With enforced systems, voter turnout was a solid 15 to 19% higher.
Whoa.
But with the not-so-strict ones, we're only talking 7 to 10%.
Wow, okay, that is a big difference. It's one thing to have it on the books,
So right.
and actually backing it up with, hey, you might actually face consequences, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. It's like
Okay.
the difference between a suggestion and a rule.
Totally.
Hmm.
But that makes you wonder about those downsides we were talking about earlier. Like, if people are voting just because they have to, not because they want to,
Yeah.
does that actually help those minority voices get heard? Or could it make it even harder for them to be heard?
It's a big question. And it really makes you think about what actually makes for a healthy democracy. You know? Like, is
Yeah.
it just about getting everyone to show up, or is it about something more?
Right, right. Because those people aren't actually engaged. If they're just checking boxes,
Exactly.
is it really a democracy?
Uh,
And speaking of checking boxes, the Kostelka paper, they didn't just look at that immediate, okay, what happens right after we put this rule in place.
yeah.
They also looked at what happened over time.
Right. The long game. Like, does this actually change how people think about voting over time?
Exactly.
Okay.
So did they find anything there? Like, did those turnout numbers hold steady, or did they, like, start to slip back down?
Well, here's where it gets interesting. They found that in those places with the stricter rules, the ones that actually enforced compulsory voting,
Yeah.
turnout actually stopped declining. Like, it kind of bucked the trend.
Interesting.
But in the places where it was more relaxed, more like, well, you should vote, but turnout kept going down over time.
So it's like having that strong system in place might actually help countries resist that whole thing of people just becoming less and less interested in politics over time.
Right. Like, it reinforces this idea of this is just what we do. We vote.
Yeah, like it's a civic duty. You do it no matter what.
So interesting. But okay, we've talked about national elections.
Right.
But what about local elections, like city council, mayoral races, that sort of thing? Because you included a really interesting study about term limits in the mix.
Oh, yeah. The one about Ecuador.
Yes, that's the one. So I'm curious, did forcing change at the top by like limiting how long people could stay in office? Did that actually trickle down and get more people to vote in those local elections?
That was the 2024 paper by Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was a fascinating case study because back in 2015, Ecuador, they were like, you know what? Term limits for everybody.
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody. President all the way down to your local mayor.
Wow. That is a big change.
Huge. So you'd think that would get people fired up about local elections.
Right.
You think so. Fresh faces, new ideas, all that. So what happened?
Well, that's the thing. Not much, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Cuba's research found that, surprisingly, that whole term limit thing didn't really change how many people voted in those local elections.
Huh. So even with this big shakeup to the whole system,
Didn't budge the needle much at all at the local level.
interesting. It makes you wonder what it would take to actually get people invested in those local races, because those are the ones that often affect their day-to-day lives even more directly.
You'd think so, right? But it seems like just changing the rules,
Yeah.
even dramatically, it's not always enough to change how people actually behave.
It's like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water.
Exactly.
Oh.
But you can't make them vote in a local election, apparently.
Right. Or at least not just by changing the rules. It seems like those reasons people vote or don't vote run a lot deeper than that.
For sure. It's complex.
So where does all of this leave us? I mean, we've talked about how making everyone vote might lead to more extreme parties getting elected or not.
Right.
We've looked at how it affects how many people actually show up to vote over time.
Long-term trends.
Yes. And even how it changes how politicians behave once they're in office. It's been quite a ride. It's definitely more complicated than it seems at first glance. It's not as easy as make everyone vote and bam, instant surge in extremism.
Right. It's not like flipping a switch.
Like it might even create more stability in the long run, at least when it comes to how many people are actually voting.
Right. At least there's that consistency.
But yeah, it's definitely not a cure-all for every problem a democracy might have.
Definitely not. And there's another layer to this we haven't even touched on yet, which is how compulsory voting changes how politicians act.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
There was this 2014 paper by Grosser and Geertz, and they were looking at how politicians spend money, allocate resources when they know everyone's going to show up to vote.
Oh, okay. So like thinking back to my political science classes, this is like pork barrel politics territory, right?
Exactly. Those little favors, targeted spending, all that stuff that politicians do to try and win over certain groups of voters.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So did they find that compulsory voting like changed the game? Did it make those politicians more likely to spread the love, knowing they couldn't just focus on getting their base to show up?
It's funny you should ask that because they actually ran an experiment to figure that out. They wanted to see if politicians would be all, well, gotta keep everyone happy now.
What happened?
Well, it didn't quite work out that way. Turns out the politicians in the compulsory voting scenario were actually more likely to just focus on their core supporters.
Really?
Yeah. They were more likely to double down on those core voters and kind of neglect everyone else.
Wow. Okay, so even when everyone's a guaranteed voter, those politicians still found a way to play favorites.
It seems like they did.
I guess you can't take the politics out of politics, even with a system like that.
It's human nature, right?
Totally. But, okay, zooming out again, what does that mean for democracy as a whole? Like, if politicians are still focusing on smaller groups, even when everyone's voting, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of trying to make things more representative?
It's a great question, and it raises a slightly concerning possibility. What if this kind of behavior, this focusing on a select few, actually makes inequality worse?
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it like that.
Like you're trying to create a more level playing field, right?
Yeah.
Get everyone to vote. But it could actually backfire if it just gives those in power even more reason to cater to certain groups over others.
That's kind of unsettling when you think about it.
Definitely gives you pause.
Yeah. It's like good intentions, but
But those unintended consequences can really trip you up.
totally. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about how making everyone vote might lead to more extreme parties getting elected or not.
Right. There's no simple answer.
We dug into how it changes voter turnout over time.
The long game.
Exactly. Yeah, even how it affects how politicians behave once they're in office. So where do we even go from here?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that it's just not as simple as people want to make it seem.
Right.
It's not a magic solution. It's not inherently good or bad. And it might even have some downsides. As we've seen, the relationship between compulsory voting and what it actually does to a country is just way more complicated than any headline or quick tick can capture.
Totally. It makes you wonder, though, what happens when you take compulsory voting and you drop it into a place where the institutions, like the government itself, aren't that strong to begin with? Does it force those institutions to get their act together, to be more responsive to everyone? Or does it just make those existing inequalities even worse? It's a lot to think about.
It really is. And there are no easy answers, that's for sure. But I think the more we understand these complexities, the better equipped we are to build systems that actually represent and work for everyone.
I completely agree. It's a conversation that we all need to be a part of. So until next time, keep asking those tough questions and keep digging deeper.